Number 1. Judy Buenoano. Judy Buenoano was an American woman whose crimes took place primarily in Florida, United States, between the early 1970s and the early 1980s. Born in Quanah, Texas, she endured a difficult childhood marked by instability and abuse. After finishing high school, she trained briefly as a nursing assistant and later settled in Florida, where she began a series of crimes that would eventually make her one of the most infamous female serial killers in the country. Her first known victim was her husband, James Goodyear, an Air Force sergeant, who died in Orlando in the year 1971. His death was initially believed to be natural, caused by an apparent illness, but years later, exhumation revealed that he had been poisoned with arsenic. Shortly after his death, Judy collected life insurance benefits. A similar pattern followed with her boyfriend, Bobby Joe Morris, who died in Colorado in 1978 under comparable circumstances. Both men exhibited symptoms of arsenic poisoning before their deaths. Judy also collected substantial insurance money following each incident. In 1980, Judy's teenage son, Michael Goodyear, was involved in a mysterious drowning incident. She claimed that he had drowned during a canoeing trip near Pensacola, but investigators later determined that his heavy leg braces and weights had been intentionally used to ensure he could not swim. His death was ruled suspicious, but no charges were immediately filed. 2 years later, in 1983, her new fiancé, John Gentry, was severely injured when his car exploded in Pensacola. He survived the blast, and his recovery led investigators to re-examine Judy's past. They discovered she had taken out multiple life insurance policies on him and had been giving him vitamin capsules, later found to contain arsenic. Judy Buenoano was arrested in March 1984. She was charged with first-degree murder for the poisoning of her husband, the drowning of her son, and the attempted murder of John Gentry. The trial took place in Florida, where she was convicted and sentenced to death for the murder of her son, as well as life imprisonment for the death of her husband. Throughout the proceedings, Judy maintained her innocence, claiming that her family members had died of natural causes. Her demeanor in court was calm and composed, often described as detached. After exhausting all appeals, Judy Buenoano was executed by electric chair at Florida State Prison in Ryford on March 30, 1998, becoming the first woman executed in Florida since 1942. She was 54 years old at the time of her death. Number 2. Beverly Gale Allett. Beverly Gale Allett was born in Corby Glen, Lincolnshire, England, and raised in a working-class family. From a young age, she was known to crave attention, often feigning illness to receive care. In her teenage years, she displayed symptoms consistent with Munchausen syndrome, a psychological condition characterized by fabricating or inducing medical issues to gain sympathy. After completing her nursing training, Allett began working as a state-enrolled nurse at Grantham and Kesteven Hospital in Lincolnshire. Between February and April 1991, while assigned to the hospital's children's ward, Allett engaged in a series of deliberate medical assaults that resulted in multiple deaths and severe injuries. The first known incident occurred on February 21, when 7-month-old Liam Taylor was admitted with an infection. Allett administered a lethal dose of insulin. The child died soon after despite resuscitation efforts. In the weeks that followed, 11-year-old Timothy Hardwick, who had cerebral palsy, was admitted and died unexpectedly under her care. As the pattern continued, other children, including 1-year-old Becky Phillips, 5-year-old Bradley Gibson, and 15-month-old Claire Peck, suffered unexplained collapses. Becky Phillips died, and her twin sister Katie later survived a cardiac arrest, but suffered permanent brain issues. Medical staff began noticing irregularities. Patients who were stable were deteriorating only under Allett's supervision. Blood tests revealed unexplained insulin and potassium levels, suggesting deliberate poisoning. By April 1991, the hospital's administration contacted Lincolnshire police after another death raised suspicion. Following a detailed investigation and the exhumation of several victims, forensic analysis confirmed elevated insulin concentrations incompatible with accidental administration. Allett was arrested on November 21, 1991. During police questioning, she denied involvement in the deaths and injuries. Psychiatrists later diagnosed her with Munchausen syndrome by proxy, a disorder where an individual harms others to gain attention or sympathy. Her trial began at Nottingham Crown Court in 1993. Prosecutors presented evidence linking her directly to the overdoses, falsified medical charts, and inconsistencies in her shifts correlating with the deaths. She was convicted on 4 counts of murder, 11 counts of attempted murder, and 11 counts of grievous bodily harm. The court sentenced her to 13 life terms of imprisonment. Due to her psychological condition, Allett was transferred to Rampton Secure Hospital, a high-security psychiatric facility in Nottinghamshire. In total, Beverly Gale Allett murdered 4 children and injured a further 9. As of August 2025, Beverly Gale Allett remains detained at Rampton Secure Hospital in Nottinghamshire, England, where she has served over 33 years. She is unlikely to be released and continues to receive psychiatric care under indefinite detention orders. Number 3. Betty Lou Beets. Betty Lou Beets was born in North Carolina and grew up in an unstable household marked by poverty and abuse. Her early years were filled with hardship, including partial deafness that developed after an illness when she was a child. She married young, at the age of 15, and over the years entered into several marriages, many of which ended in violence, accusations, and mistrust. By the early 1980s, Beets was living in Gun Barrel City, Texas, with her 5th husband, Jimmy Don Beets, a retired Dallas firefighter. On August 6, 1983, Jimmy Don Beets disappeared from their home. Authorities were alerted after his boat was found drifting on Lake Athens with his fishing license and tackle box inside, suggesting an accidental drowning. His disappearance prompted a massive search, but no body was recovered. The case remained unsolved for years, and Beets collected life insurance benefits and pension payments, claiming to be a grieving widow. In 1985, the case took a turn when police received information from her adult son, Robert Branson, who told them that his mother had confessed to murdering Jimmy Don. Acting on his statements, investigators searched Beets's property and discovered human remains buried beneath a decorative wishing well in her front yard. A second set of remains, belonging to her 4th husband, Doyle Wayne Barker, was found buried in a garage on the same property. Following the discovery, Beets was arrested and charged with capital murder. During interrogation, she maintained that she had no recollection of the events and suggested that her son had fabricated the confession. The prosecution argued that she had murdered both men for financial gain, noting that Beets had attempted to profit from insurance and property inheritance following their deaths. Her trial began in 1985 in Henderson County, Texas. The jury heard testimony from family members who stated that Beets had openly discussed plans to murder her husband and that she had enlisted her son's help in concealing the body. She was convicted of the capital murder of Jimmy Don Beets and sentenced to death. On February 24, 2000, Betty Lou Beets was executed by lethal injection at the Huntsville unit in Texas. She was 62 years old at the time of her death. Number 4. Joanne Dennehy. On March 19, 2013, in Peterborough, Cambridgeshire, England, Joanne Dennehy murdered her first victim, 31-year-old Lucas Schlaboszewski, marking the beginning of a series of murders that would make her one of Britain's most infamous female serial killers. Joanne Dennehy was born in St. Albans and raised in a middle-class family. By her teenage years, she had developed behavioral problems and left home at 16. In her adult life, she struggled with substance abuse and unstable relationships. In early 2013, she lured Lukasz to a property in Orton Goldhay, where she used a knife on him multiple times till he died. Days later, she murdered her landlord, 48-year-old John Chapman, and 56-year-old Kevin Lee, whose body was found in a ditch, dressed in a black sequin dress. After fleeing Peterborough, she attacked two men, Robin Bariza and John Rogers in Hereford, both of whom survived. Dennehy was arrested on April 10, 2013, after being spotted by police in Hereford. During interrogation, she showed no remorse and reportedly laughed while describing the murders. She stated that she murdered for fun. At her trial in November 2013 at the Old Bailey, she pleaded guilty to 3 counts of murder and 2 of attempted murder. The judge sentenced her to a whole life order, meaning she would never be released. She became the 3rd woman in British history to receive a whole life sentence. As of August 2025, Joanne Dennehy remains incarcerated at HM Prison Low Newton. She has served 12 years of her life sentence without parole. Number 5. Aileen Wuornos. Aileen Carol Wuornos was born in Rochester, Michigan, and endured a troubled childhood marked by neglect, abuse, and abandonment. Her father was imprisoned for violent offenses and later died by harming himself, while her mother left her and her brother at an early age. Raised by her grandparents, Wuornos began exhibiting behavioral problems during her teenage years and left home before turning 15. She supported herself through street work and petty crime, frequently moving across states. By her late 30s, she had settled in Florida, where a series of murders between 1989 and 1990 turned her into one of the most studied female serial killers in American history. The first confirmed murder occurred on November 30, 1989, near Daytona Beach, Florida. The victim, Richard Mallory, was found shot several times in his abandoned car. Over the next year, 6 more men were found dead under similar circumstances. David Spears, Charles Carskadden, Troy Burris, Charles Humphreys, Peter Seams, and Walter Antonio. All were middle-aged or older men who had encountered Wuornos while she was hitchhiking along Florida highways. Each victim had been shot multiple times with a .22 caliber revolver, and their vehicles were later discovered abandoned. Wuornos was accompanied for much of this period by her companion, Tyria Moore, with whom she lived in a series of motels. After the discovery of the 7th victim, investigators linked the cases through ballistic evidence and witness reports describing 2 women seen driving the victims' cars. Police recovered fingerprints from one of the abandoned vehicles that matched Wuornos, leading to her arrest on January 9, 1991, at the Last Resort Bar in Volusia County, Florida. Moore later cooperated with authorities, testifying that Wuornos had confessed to the murders. During her trial in 1992, Wuornos claimed that the murders were acts of self-defense, stating that the men had attempted to assault her while she was working as a prostitute. The prosecution argued that she murdered for financial gain, as many victims were robbed. She was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to death. Over the next decade, she faced multiple trials for the other killings, each resulting in additional death sentences. While on death row at the Florida State Prison in Ryford, Wuornos exhibited erratic behavior and made several conflicting statements about her motives. She withdrew her appeals in 2002, expressing fatigue with the legal process. On October 9, 2002, Aileen Wuornos was executed by lethal injection. Her final statement was brief. "I'd just like to say I'm sailing with the Rock, and I'll be back." As of October 2025, she is still deceased. Number 6. Marie No. Marie No was born and raised in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, in a working-class neighborhood. She married Arthur No when she was in her late teens, and together they lived in a modest home in the Kensington area of the city. Between the early 1940s and late 1960s, Marie gave birth to 10 children. 2 of them died shortly after birth from natural causes, but the remaining 8 died mysteriously while still infants, all under suspicious circumstances. The deaths occurred over a span of 19 years. Each infant reportedly died while alone with Marie, usually during the night. The official causes at the time were listed as sudden infant death syndrome or unknown medical complications, and no investigation was initially pursued. The repeated tragedies drew community sympathy rather than suspicion, as the couple was seen as quiet and grieving parents. Arthur continued to work at a factory while Marie remained home, her mental health deteriorating with each loss. In the 1990s, renewed interest in historical child death cases led Philadelphia detectives to re-examine the Noe family tragedies. The pattern of deaths raised concern, prompting a detailed investigation. When questioned in 1998, Marie eventually confessed to smothering 4 of her children and admitted that she might have done the others too. She described the murders as acts committed during moments of frustration and exhaustion, not premeditated cruelty. Her husband was never charged and claimed he had no knowledge of her actions. Marie No was arrested in August 1998. The court sentenced her to 20 years of probation with the first 5 years under house arrest. Number 7. Heather Dawn Presti. On May 25, 2023, in Butler County, Pennsylvania, Heather Presti was arrested and charged in connection with multiple patient deaths at nursing homes across western Pennsylvania. Presti was born in 1982 and spent her early adulthood working as a registered nurse after earlier training as a veterinary technician. She came to occupy positions in skilled nursing facilities beginning in 2020, moving among homes in Allegheny, Armstrong, Butler, and Westmoreland counties. As she cared for elderly and medically vulnerable patients, an unusual pattern of sudden deaths began to emerge, deaths that later proved to be far from coincidental. Between late 2022 and early 2023, at facilities such as Quality Life Services in Chicora, 2 patients, James Bartow, age 55, and Joseph Campbell, age 83, died after receiving unusually high doses of insulin. A 3rd patient, Nicholas Simbal, age 43, also died under similar circumstances. 22 patients in total were determined to have received lethal or potentially lethal insulin overdoses, with 17 of them dying. Investigators grew suspicious when records of insulin usage failed to match patients' medical needs, and missing vials of insulin were noted. Witnesses and toxicology results linked her to the overdoses. Presti was taken into custody and held at Butler County Prison. At her trial, Presti pleaded guilty to 3 counts of first-degree murder and 19 counts of attempted murder in order to avoid the death penalty. She claimed she believed she was easing suffering and that she did not fully understand the severity of her actions. On the 2nd of May 2024, the court in Butler County sentenced her to 3 consecutive life terms without parole for the murders. Number 8. Vicki Dawn Jackson. Vicki Dawn Jackson was a registered nurse who worked at Nocona General Hospital in Nocona, Texas. Between the years of 1999 and 2002, a series of unexplained patient deaths occurred under her supervision. The victims were elderly or seriously ill patients, many of whom were expected to recover from their conditions before their sudden and fatal declines. Jackson's actions later revealed one of the most disturbing cases of medical homicide in the United States. Born and raised in Texas, Vicki Dawn Jackson was regarded by colleagues as a competent nurse and a mother of 2. Her co-workers initially saw her as calm and professional, though some noticed changes in her demeanor following personal and marital difficulties. During her time at the hospital, an unusual pattern emerged. Patients who had been stable began dying unexpectedly, often during her night shifts. These deaths drew attention after the hospital pharmacist discovered that several vials of the powerful muscle relaxant Mivacron were missing. The medicine used for anesthesia could cause respiratory issues if improperly administered. Authorities launched an investigation in 2002 after a total of 10 suspicious deaths were identified. All had occurred under Jackson's care. One of the victims, Nokona's former mayor, Monty McCoyne, died after being admitted for minor treatment. Another patient, Ethelyn Jenkins, who had been recovering steadily, died suddenly after Jackson entered her room. Medical staff began quietly reporting concerns, and Jackson was eventually suspended pending inquiry. When investigators analyzed tissue samples, traces of Mivacron were found in the bodies of multiple patients. Jackson was arrested in July 2002 and charged with capital murder. During interrogation, she denied the accusations, suggesting she was being framed by the hospital administration. However, prosecutors built a strong case around the drug theft records, witness testimonies, and toxicology evidence. At trial in 2006, held in Montague County, Jackson faced 10 counts of capital murder. To avoid the death penalty, she agreed to a plea deal and entered a no-contest plea to a single count of murder. She was sentenced to life imprisonment with no possibility of parole. Vicki Dawn Jackson murdered a total of 10 patients. As of August 2025, she remains in prison, having served 19 years of a life sentence without parole. Number 9. Irina Gaidamachuk. Irina Viktorovna Gaidamachuk was born in Nyagan, Russia, and grew up in a troubled household marked by poverty and alcoholism. She began drinking heavily in her teenage years and struggled to maintain steady employment as an adult. By her late 20s, she was married to Yuri Gaidamachuk and had 2 children. Her husband was often away working, and Irina's addiction to alcohol worsened. She was denied welfare support due to her drinking habits, and she resorted to theft to sustain her dependence. Between the years 2002 and 2010, she carried out a series of brutal murders across the Sverdlovsk region, targeting elderly women living alone. Her first known murder occurred in the town of Krasnoufinsk in 2002. Posing as a social worker offering pension benefits or government assistance, she gained entry into the homes of older women. Once inside, she would attack them with a hammer or axe, striking them in the head before stealing money, jewelry, or valuables to buy alcohol. Over the course of 8 years, she repeated this method across multiple towns, including and nearby villages. The victims, all women aged between 70 and 90 years, often lived alone and were known to be trusting of visitors. The murders remained unsolved for years, as investigators initially suspected a male offender. In 2010, police noticed a pattern of similar crimes and identified Gaidamachuk through witness descriptions and forensic evidence linking her to one of the crime scenes. She was arrested in May 2010 after attempting to rob another elderly woman, who survived and provided a description. During interrogation, Gaidamachuk confessed to 17 murders but claimed she acted out of desperation for money to buy vodka. Her husband later told authorities he had been unaware of her crimes but suspected her of theft. The court sentenced her to 20 years in a penal colony, citing her cooperation and confession as mitigating factors. She was imprisoned at a women's correctional colony in Mordovia. Number 10. Tamara Ivanutina. Tamara Antonovna Ivanutina was arrested in Kyiv, Ukrainian SSR, in March 1987, after a series of mysterious poisonings that occurred where she worked as a cafeteria cook. Born into a family with a long history of criminal behavior, she grew up in an environment where manipulation and greed were common. By her early 40s, she had already developed a pattern of using poison as a means of control and gain, a habit learned from her parents, who had also been convicted for similar crimes. In February 1987, several students and teachers at the school began suffering from severe stomach pain and vomiting after eating the meal she prepared. 2 children and 1 teacher died. Investigators soon discovered that Tamara had laced the food with a highly toxic substance originally intended for use as rat poison. A search of her home revealed more evidence connecting her to other suspicious deaths, including her husband, her brother-in-law, and several acquaintances. She was arrested and confessed to multiple murders, stating that she used poison to remove unpleasant people and settle personal grievances. The total number of victims was 6, including family members and co-workers. Her confession led to the discovery that her sister and parents had also used the substance to murder others for profit or convenience. Tamara was charged with multiple counts of murder and attempted murder. She was found guilty and sentenced to death. November 21, 1987, Tamara Ivanutina was executed by shooting. Number 11. Anna Marie Hahn. Anna Marie Hahn was arrested in Cincinnati, Ohio, in August 1937 after a series of suspicious deaths among elderly German men under her care. Born in Bavaria, she immigrated to the United States as a young woman and later settled in Cincinnati's German community. She was in her mid-20s when she began offering home nursing services to elderly men, presenting herself as a kind caregiver. Her first known victim was Ernest Kohler, who died suddenly after falling ill while under her care. Soon after, Albert Parker, George Obendorfer, and Jacob Wagner also died in similar circumstances, each leaving her money or valuables. When George Heiss, another of her clients, became ill in July 1937, doctors discovered arsenic in his system. He survived long enough to alert authorities. The subsequent autopsies of her previous patients revealed lethal doses of arsenic and other poisons. Anna was arrested and charged with murder. During her trial in November 1937, prosecutors presented medical evidence and bank records showing she had stolen money from her victims. She denied intent to murder, claiming she only wanted to ease their pain. The jury found her guilty of first-degree murder for the death of Jacob Wagner. She was sentenced to death and imprisoned at the Ohio State Penitentiary. On December 7, 1938, at age 32, Anna Marie Hahn was executed in the electric chair, becoming the first woman executed in Ohio's electric chair. Number 12. Mary Beth Tinning. Mary Beth Rowe Tinning was an American woman from Schenectady, New York, whose case spanned over more than a decade and shocked the nation for its quiet persistence and tragic nature. Born into a working-class family, she experienced an unstable upbringing marked by neglect. As a young adult, she married Joseph Tinning, and together they settled into what appeared to be an ordinary suburban life. However, between the early 1970s and mid-1980s, a disturbing pattern began to unfold within the Tinning household. Over a period of 14 years, Mary Beth's 9 children, 8 biological and 1 adopted, died under unusual and suspicious circumstances. Each death was initially attributed to natural causes, including sudden infant death syndrome and genetic disorders. The first child, Jennifer, died shortly after birth, followed by Joseph Jr., Michael, Mary Frances, Jonathan, Susan, Timothy, Nathan, and Tammy Lynn. The deaths occurred one after another, and local doctors, though perplexed, did not suspect foul play until the pattern became undeniable. Joseph, her husband, later admitted that he too had begun to question the string of tragedies but did not intervene. The case came to a turning point in December 1985, when 4-month-old Tammy Lynn, the Tinnings' last child, was pronounced dead. Hospital staff immediately suspected that the child's death was not natural. An autopsy revealed asphyxiation as the likely cause. Investigators reopened the previous deaths, uncovering inconsistencies and the absence of medical explanations. During interrogation, Mary Beth initially denied wrongdoing, but eventually confessed to smothering 3 of her children, Jonathan, Timothy, and Tammy Lynn. She later retracted parts of her confession, claiming she had been emotionally manipulated during questioning. Mary Beth Tinning was arrested in February 1986 and charged with the second-degree murder of Tammy Lynn. In July 1987, she was convicted of second-degree murder and sentenced to 20 years to life imprisonment. In total, she was believed to have murdered 9 children, primarily through asphyxiation, using suffocation as her method of killing. Number 13. Auburn. Rebecca. On December 13, 2022, in Columbus, Ohio, Rebecca Auburn is alleged to have dosed a man she had met for intimate activities, marking the beginning of a series of incidents that would later lead prosecutors to accuse her of multiple murders. Over the next several months through to June 2023, at least 4 men died of overdoses, and 1 survived, all in Columbus. Investigators describe the location of the crimes as various residences and hotel rooms in Franklin County, especially in northeast Columbus, and along corridors such as Interstate 71 and State Route 161. Rebecca Auburn grew up in Ohio and worked in social services and community outreach, before later engaging in behavior that investigators say included meeting men online or in person for paid sexual encounters. By her early 30s, she had amassed financial pressures and personal grievances. In December 2022, she allegedly met the first victim, offered companionship, then secretly administered substances to murder. The victim reportedly survived. In January 2023, a second man died after experiencing sudden respiratory arrest. Similar patterns followed in April and June, with 2 more victims fatally overdosing while Auburn was present. In each case, authorities claim she incapacitated men with sedatives, then stole their belongings. The pattern drew the attention of law enforcement. She was first charged in September 2023 with murder, assault, robbery, trafficking, tampering with evidence, and corruption of another with hard substances. A Franklin County grand jury later indicted her on 28 counts. In February 2025, a judge found her competent to stand trial, rejecting arguments of mental incompetence. Her trial has not yet begun. She has not offered a detailed own-side confession, stating only that she did not murder those men, and that some charges rely on circumstantial linkages. She is accused of murdering 4 men and attempting to murder 1 more. Number 14. Margie Velma Barfield. Margie Velma Barfield was born in South Carolina and raised in rural North Carolina. She grew up in a poor household and experienced an unstable childhood marked by strict discipline and limited opportunities. By her late teens, she married Thomas Burke, and together they had 2 children. Her early adult life was marked by domestic difficulties, financial instability, and health problems that would later worsen her dependency on prescription medication. By the early 1970s, Barfield's life had taken a tragic turn. After the death of her first husband, she married again, but the marriage also ended in turmoil. In the years that followed, she began working as a caregiver and housekeeper for elderly and ill individuals in rural North Carolina. It was during this period that a series of suspicious deaths began occurring around her. In 1974, her mother, Lillian Bullard, suddenly fell ill and died after a brief period of stomach pain. The cause of death was not questioned at the time. In the years following, 2 men she had relationships with, Jennings Barfield and Stuart Taylor, also died under similar mysterious circumstances. Investigations later revealed that each had been poisoned with arsenic. Barfield also worked for several elderly clients who died unexpectedly after she began caring for them. The pattern of sudden illnesses and deaths eventually drew police attention after the death of Stuart Taylor in February 1978 in Robeson County, North Carolina. Taylor had exhibited symptoms of severe gastrointestinal distress before dying. When an autopsy revealed the presence of arsenic, suspicion immediately turned toward Barfield. She was arrested and charged with his murder after investigators connected the other deaths to her through exhumations and toxicology tests. During questioning, Barfield eventually confessed to poisoning 4 people, though investigators suspected she had been responsible for more. At trial in November 1978, she was convicted of first-degree murder for the death of Stuart Taylor. Her defense team argued that her actions were influenced by mental illness and the side effects of medication, but the jury found her fully responsible. She was sentenced to death. While incarcerated at Central Prison in Raleigh, North Carolina, Barfield became deeply religious and expressed remorse for her crimes. She often described herself as having been under the influence of addiction and mental instability during the murders. Despite several appeals for clemency based on her deteriorating health and rehabilitation, her sentence was upheld. On November 2, 1984, Margie Velma Barfield was executed by lethal injection, becoming the first woman executed in the United States since the reinstatement of the death penalty in 1976. Number 15. Patricia Allenson. Patricia Allenson was an American woman from Milledgeville, Georgia, whose name became linked to a series of poisonings and manipulative acts that resulted in multiple deaths during the early 1970s. She was born into a middle-class family and grew up with a fascination for tragedy and sympathy, traits that would later define her behavior. By her mid-20s, she had married Tom Allenson, a man from a respected Southern family, and appeared to lead a conventional life. Beneath that image, however, lay a deep obsession with control and a desire for emotional attention. In 1974, Patricia's marriage began to unravel due to her erratic behavior and growing hostility toward her in-laws, Tom's parents, and grandparents. Her resentment escalated when she felt they disapproved of her. On May 4, 1974, Patricia poisoned her father-in-law, Felix Allenson, and her mother-in-law, Minnie Allenson, at their home in Milledgeville, Georgia. Both victims died from arsenic poisoning administered through food and drink. Investigators later linked her to additional poisonings involving elderly relatives and associates, though not all resulted in death. Suspicion grew when Tom's grandparents also fell mysteriously ill. Tom himself survived multiple poisoning attempts after experiencing strange symptoms that doctors initially could not explain. The turning point came when Tom's nurse, who had been helping him recover, grew suspicious of Patricia's constant presence and inconsistent explanations. Authorities began surveillance and collected toxicology evidence, which confirmed arsenic traces in both deceased and surviving victims. Patricia was arrested later that year and charged with multiple counts of murder and attempted murder. During her trial, prosecutors described her as manipulative, stating she sought sympathy by portraying herself as a grieving widow and caregiver. The defense argued diminished mental capacity, but psychiatric evaluations found her legally sane. After weeks of testimony, Patricia Allenson was convicted of 2 murders and several counts of attempted murder. She was sentenced to life imprisonment at the Georgia Women's Correctional Institution. Throughout her incarceration, Patricia maintained her innocence and portrayed herself as misunderstood. Prison staff noted her calm demeanor and her tendency to seek emotional attachment from others, mirroring the manipulative behavior that had characterized her life before imprisonment. Patricia served more than 4 decades in prison. She died in custody in the early 2000s, having never admitted guilt or expressed remorse. As of August 2025, Patricia Van Radcliffe Allenson remains deceased after serving approximately 40 years at the Georgia Women's Correctional Institution. In total, she was convicted of murdering 2 people and attempting to kill several others. Patricia carried out the attacks using arsenic poisoning, which she secretly administered through food and drinks. Number 16. Chisako Kakehi. Chisako Kakehi was a Japanese woman from Kyoto, arrested in November 2014 for the serial murders of her romantic partners. Born and raised in Kagoshima Prefecture, she lived a quiet life before turning to a pattern of deception and death that shocked Japan. After the death of her husband in 2012, she began targeting elderly men through dating agencies, presenting herself as a caring widow seeking companionship. Her first confirmed victim, Isao Kakei, her husband of 1 month, died suddenly at their home in Muko, Kyoto Prefecture, in December 2013. Investigators later found cyanide compounds in his body. Subsequent investigations linked her to the deaths of 2 former partners, Masanori Honda and Minoru Hioki, both of whom died under similar suspicious circumstances involving cyanide poisoning. Authorities discovered a stash of cyanide hidden in a flower pot at her home. During questioning, Kakehi initially denied involvement, but later made ambiguous statements, suggesting she had administered poison. The trial began at the Kyoto District Court in 2017. Prosecutors charged her with 3 counts of murder and 1 count of attempted murder, arguing that her motive was financial gain through insurance payouts and inheritance. Kakehi's defense claimed diminished mental capacity due to dementia, but psychiatric evaluations determined she was competent to stand trial. In November 2017, the court found her guilty and sentenced her to death. Throughout the proceedings, Kakehi remained largely expressionless, occasionally smiling, and showed little remorse. She did not appeal her sentence, making the death penalty final in 2021. As of August 2025, Chisako Kakehi remains on death row at the Osaka Detention Center, awaiting execution. She was 77 years old at sentencing and is now in her early 80s. In total, she was found guilty of murdering 3 people and attempting to kill a 4th. Chisako Kakehi carried out her attacks using potassium cyanide concealed in drinks and capsules. Number 17. Martha Beck. Martha Beck was born in Florida and endured a difficult upbringing marked by poverty and abuse. As a young woman, she became pregnant out of wedlock, which at that time carried a heavy social stigma. She eventually worked as a nurse and later as an undertaker's assistant, struggling with her weight and health issues while also facing repeated rejection in her personal life. By her late 20s, she was already showing signs of emotional instability and desperation for companionship. Her life changed when she connected with Raymond Fernandez through a newspaper Lonely Hearts advertisement. Fernandez, an ex-convict, had begun corresponding with women for financial gain. When Beck joined him, they devised a plan to defraud women and in some cases resorted to murder. By the late 1940s, the pair had moved across several states, using false identities and luring women through romantic promises. The crimes escalated in New York and Michigan. In one instance, Janet Fay, a wealthy widow, was targeted. She was murdered after questioning Fernandez about his intentions, and her body was hidden in Beck's home. Later, in Grand Rapids, Michigan, the pair lodged with Delphine Downing and her young daughter. Beck grew jealous and distraught over Downing's suspicions, and Fernandez shot Downing. Beck then killed the child, fearing the girl would reveal their crime. The sequence of murders between the late 1940s shocked communities, as authorities pieced together a trail of fraud, deception, and homicide tied to the couple. They were arrested in Michigan in 1949 after neighbors raised suspicions about Downing's disappearance. Authorities quickly linked them to other deaths through confessions and witness testimony. Extradited to New York, Fernandez and Beck were charged with first-degree murder in the case of Janet Fay, as Michigan law at the time did not allow capital punishment. Their joint trial drew attention because of their unusual devotion to each other. Beck insisted she acted out of loyalty to Fernandez, while Fernandez portrayed himself as manipulated by her. In March 1951, both were convicted and sentenced to death by electric chair at Sing Sing prison. Beck showed little remorse during sentencing, claiming she had found happiness with Fernandez despite their crimes. She did not appeal extensively, accepting the sentence with resignation. On the day of her execution, she gave no elaborate final statement beyond affirming her love for Fernandez. Martha Beck was executed in Sing Sing prison in March 1951, after serving roughly 2 years on death row. She was executed by electrocution at the age of 31. In total, Martha and Raymond Fernandez were officially convicted of murdering 3 people, but investigators suspected the pair may have murdered as many as 17 to 20 victims across several U.S. states. Number 18. Jean Weber. Jean Weber was born in Paris, France, and lived a difficult early life, marked by poverty and hardship. She married young and had 2 children, both of whom died under unclear circumstances. By her mid-20s, Weber was struggling to support herself through domestic work, and her unstable personal life soon became defined by a disturbing pattern of child deaths occurring wherever she was present. Her crimes took place primarily in Paris during the early 1900s, and she became known for the unexplained suffocation of children under her care. The first recognized death occurred when Weber was caring for her own young son. The boy was found lifeless, his death ruled as a result of convulsions. Not long after, similar incidents happened with nieces and nephews belonging to her siblings. In each case, Weber claimed the children had suddenly fallen ill. Between the years 1902 and 1906, several of these children died while she was the only adult present. Family members initially dismissed suspicion out of trust, but as the pattern continued, concern grew. The turning point came on March 2, 1905, in Paris, when Weber was discovered attempting to strangle her 10-year-old nephew, Marcel, who was later found unconscious but revived. Marks on his neck and the timing of previous deaths led to her arrest. She was charged with multiple counts of child murder but was acquitted after her defense argued insanity and lack of evidence. Public opinion was divided, and despite medical experts suggesting a mental disorder, Weber was released. After her release, she resumed work as a caretaker and nurse. In 1907, she was employed at a children's home in the French countryside, where another child died under similar circumstances. The case led to renewed investigations. Authorities discovered that Weber had also murdered a young boy named Auguste Bavouzet by strangulation, an act she later admitted to. Arrested again, she was deemed mentally unstable by psychiatric examiners and sent to an asylum rather than prison. During her confinement, Weber displayed signs of severe mental deterioration, alternating between silence and outbursts. She expressed no coherent explanation for her crimes, and no formal final statement was recorded. She died in the asylum at Thanes, France, in 1913, after several years of institutionalization. As of August 2025, Jeannie Weber remains listed in French criminal history as deceased, having served approximately 6 years in psychiatric custody before her death. In total, she murdered at least 10 children, though some reports suggest up to 15 victims may have died under suspicious circumstances linked to her. Number 19. Lyda Southard. Lyda Trueblood Southard was born in Missouri and later moved to Twin Falls, Idaho, where she became known as one of the earliest female serial killers in the United States. Her life appeared ordinary at first. She worked as a housewife and homemaker, admired in her small community for her charm and social grace. Beneath that image, however, was a pattern of deaths that would later reveal her as a calculated poisoner who sought financial gain through life insurance policies. Her series of crimes began in Twin Falls in the early 1900s. Her first husband, Robert Dooley, died unexpectedly after a brief illness, which doctors attributed to typhoid fever. Shortly after his death, Lyda collected on his life insurance policy. Within a short time, her brother-in-law, Edward Dooley, who lived with them, also died under similar circumstances. Local physicians found the cases suspicious, but no charges were made. Lyda soon remarried, this time to William McHaffey, who died suddenly in Montana. She collected another life insurance payout. Over the next several years, she repeated this pattern with multiple men. Her third husband, Harlan Lewis, died in Billings, Montana. Her fourth, Edward Meyer, died in Montana as well. And her fifth, Paul Southard, also met an unexpected death. Even her young daughter, Lorraine Dooley, was among her victims, succumbing to what was described as a mysterious illness. Authorities eventually noticed the sequence of deaths and insurance claims, leading to suspicions of foul play. In 1921, after the exhumation of several victims' bodies, chemists detected arsenic in their remains. Southard was arrested in Honolulu, Hawaii, after fleeing with a new husband, Paul Southard, using a false identity. She was extradited to Idaho to stand trial. During her trial in 1922, she appeared calm and polite, denying all charges and insisting the deaths were coincidental. The prosecution presented chemical evidence linking her to multiple poisonings. She was convicted of second-degree murder for the death of her fourth husband, Edward Meyer, and sentenced to 10 years to life at the Idaho State Penitentiary. While serving her sentence, Southard maintained her innocence, claiming she had been unfairly judged because she was a woman. In 1931, she escaped from prison using a laundry truck, but was later recaptured in Denver, Colorado, and returned to custody. After serving more than 20 years, she was paroled in 1941 for good behavior. Lyda Southard spent her remaining years quietly in Utah, where she lived under supervision until her death from natural causes in 1958. Number 20. Raya and Sakina. Raya and Sakina were two Egyptian sisters who became infamous for a series of murders committed in Alexandria, Egypt, during the early 1920s. They were born into poverty and hardship in Upper Egypt, and later moved north in search of better opportunities. Both women lived turbulent lives marked by poverty, domestic instability, and association with criminal activities such as theft and prostitution. By their 30s, they had developed a criminal network involving their husbands, Hasbullah and Mohammed Abdel Al, and several male accomplices. The sequence of their crimes began around 1919, during a period of social and economic unrest in Egypt, following the First World War. Many women in Alexandria were reported missing, most of them appearing to vanish after visiting Raya or Sakina's homes. The sisters lured their victims, usually women who wore valuable jewelry or carried money, by offering companionship, alcohol, and a safe place to socialize. Once the victims were inside, the sisters and their accomplices attacked them, strangling them with scarves or pieces of cloth while muffling their cries. After each killing, they stripped the bodies of jewelry and valuables, buried them beneath the floors of their rented houses, and divided the stolen possessions among the group. The killings continued for several months, and local authorities initially dismissed the disappearances as voluntary runaways. However, suspicions arose when construction workers unearthed human remains beneath one of the houses formerly occupied by the sisters. Police investigations led to the discovery of multiple bodies buried in different locations tied to the same family. Rhea and Sakina, along with their husbands and accomplices, were arrested in 1921. Under interrogation, both women gave conflicting statements, but eventually confessed to involvement in the murders. Their trial, held in 1921, attracted national attention as it marked one of Egypt's first recorded cases of female serial killers. They were charged with multiple counts of murder and robbery. Both sisters remained largely unemotional during court proceedings, occasionally denying responsibility and claiming they were following their husbands' orders. Witnesses testified to their direct participation in the killings. The court found them guilty of murdering at least 17 women. On May 21, 1921, Rhea and Sakina, along with their husbands, were sentenced to death by hanging. The executions took place at the Mansoura prison later that year, making them the first women to be executed by civil authorities in modern Egyptian history. Number 21. Tamara Samsonova. Tamara Mitrofanovna Samsonova was a Russian woman whose crimes took place in St. Petersburg, Russia. Her arrest in late July of the year 2015 revealed one of the most unsettling cases in the country's recent history. Born in the early 1940s in Uzur, Krasnoyarsk Krai, Tamara later moved to Leningrad, where she graduated from the Linguistic State University and worked in the hospitality industry, including a long employment at a major hotel. For decades, she was considered quiet, polite, and reclusive by neighbors who saw little sign of violence in her demeanor. The crimes began to unfold over a span of nearly 2 decades. Police suspected that Samsonova may have started killing as far back as the late 1990s. Her first known victim was her husband, Alexei Samsonov, who disappeared around 1999. Despite numerous searches and missing person reports, his body was never recovered. Years later, in 2015, the disappearance and subsequent discovery of dismembered body parts in St. Petersburg's Frunzensky district brought renewed attention to her. The remains were later identified as belonging to her 79-year-old friend and roommate, Valentina Ulanova. Investigators learned that Tamara had moved in with Ulanova to help care for her, but the relationship had soured over time. On the night of the killing, after a dispute over household chores, Tamara allegedly sedated Valentina with sleeping pills before cutting her throat with a hacksaw. She then dismembered the body using kitchen knives and a saw, placing the remains in pea bags which she disposed of in nearby streets. Surveillance cameras later captured her carrying the bags outside the building. When confronted by police, Tamara appeared calm and cooperative. A search of her apartment revealed a diary written in both Russian and English, where she had described several killings in great detail, including possible earlier victims. She was taken into custody and charged with murder. During court hearings, Tamara displayed little emotion and even appeared to smile on several occasions. She told investigators that she had been mentally ill and had long been under psychiatric supervision. The court ordered a full psychiatric evaluation, which found her unfit to stand trial due to chronic paranoid schizophrenia. Instead of imprisonment, she was committed indefinitely to a secure psychiatric hospital. Tamara Samsonova was responsible for at least 2 confirmed murders, though investigators believe the number may be higher. The attacks were carried out using knives, saws, and sedatives. As of August 2025, Tamara Samsonova remains confined to the Kazan Special Psychiatric Hospital in Russia, where she has served approximately 10 years under compulsory treatment. She was 71 years old at the time of her arrest and remains institutionalized, with no release date. Number 22. Rosemary West. On February 24, 1994, police officers in Gloucester, England, discovered human remains buried at 25 Cromwell Street, the home of Rosemary West and her husband, Frederick West. The investigation revealed a series of brutal murders spanning over 2 decades, making the couple among Britain's most infamous serial killers. Rosemary Pauline West, born in Devon, England, had a troubled upbringing, marked by instability and abuse. In her late teens, she met Frederick West, a man more than 10 years older, and soon became his partner in both life and crime. Together, they lured young women, often runaways or lodgers, into their home, where they were assaulted, tortured, and murdered. Victims included their own daughter, Heather West, whose disappearance in 1987 led investigators to reopen inquiries into the family. Frederick West was arrested in February 1994 and later took his own life in prison before trial. Rosemary was charged with 10 counts of murder, including that of her daughter. Her trial began in 1995 at Winchester Crown Court, where she maintained her innocence throughout. After 7 weeks, she was convicted on all counts and sentenced to life imprisonment without parole. She was convicted of 10 murders. Number 23. Brenda Cecilia Aguero. On March 18, 2022, at the neonatal ward of the Ramon Carrillo Maternal Neonatal Hospital in Córdoba, Argentina, Brenda Cecilia Aguero began a series of assaults on newborns under her care. Over the following months, until June 6, multiple infants experienced sudden cardiac issues or respiratory collapse during shifts for which Aguero was responsible. Brenda was born in Buenos Aires and later moved to Córdoba. She completed nursing school in 2018 and had worked in hospitals since. At the time of the events, she lived with her mother and 2 sisters and held a position within the hospital that permitted her access to neonates and medical supplies. During the period between March and June 2022, 5 infants died under her watch, while 8 others survived serious medical crises. Autopsies and forensic investigations disclosed abnormally high levels of potassium and insulin in the bodies of the deceased infants, levels inconsistent with natural medical conditions. Prosecution evidence showed that Aguero had obtained doses from emergency carts and concealed syringes, with medical records and timestamps placing her on shift during all 13 incidents. One mother testified she saw Aguero take her baby, move away, and return just before the child ceased breathing. Witnesses also noted that Aguero often wore long sleeves even in warm weather, which her colleagues found odd. As suspicion grew, hospital administrators and provincial health authorities initiated an internal inquiry. Aguero was arrested on August 19, 2022, and charged with 5 counts of aggravated homicide and 8 counts of attempted homicide. She was held in Bauer Penitentiary, in Córdoba, in isolation from other inmates. Her trial began on January 6, 2025, at the Córdoba Criminal Court. Psychological evaluations during the proceedings characterized her personality as narcissistic and lacking empathy, with traits of dissociative behavior, though experts agreed she was legally sane and fully responsible. Aguero denied all charges and claimed she was made a scapegoat, alleging systemic failures in the hospital. During her trial, she repeatedly refused to admit guilt and sometimes shifted blame onto a colleague, though she did not produce definitive proof. On June 18, 2025, the court sentenced her to life imprisonment, with parole eligibility only after 35 years. At sentencing, she repeated, "I am not that monster that they have created in the media. I understand the pain of the mothers, but I am not the serial killer they made everyone believe." She is convicted for murdering 5 children and attempting to murder 8 more. Number 24. Kulthum Akbari. On September 2023, in Sari Mazandaran province, Iran, Kulthum Akbari was arrested under suspicion of involvement in the death of her 82-year-old husband, Gholam Reza Babai. At that point, numerous years of hidden deaths would come into the light. Kulthum Akbari was born in Malakabadi, Bala, Iran. She is reported to have entered marriages both formal and temporary, known in Iran as sige, with many older men over a span of years. She cultivated a reputation as a spouse to older, often solitary, men who held property or wealth. Over time, a pattern emerged. Her husbands would become ill and die within a few months of marriage or association, often after she had secured dowry payments or property transfers. Her method, according to investigations, was subtle and concealed. She would dissolve pharmaceuticals or sedatives, including blood pressure medicines, or industrial alcohol into tea, syrup, or drinks. In the early phase, when a victim became ill, she would accompany them to hospitals and appear caring, mitigating suspicion. Later, by increasing doses, she would render them unconscious or exacerbate underlying conditions until death. Because many of her husbands were elderly or with chronic illnesses, initial autopsies or examinations attributed their deaths to natural causes or existing health problems. One intended victim, Masih Nemati, survived after ingesting a poisoned syrup and was later ejected from his home. Although he did not immediately press charges, his family later connected that incident to the pattern of deaths when Gholam Reza Babai's son and the son of Akbari's earlier husband noticed the similarities. That led to renewed scrutiny and her eventual arrest. During interrogation, Akbari gave contradictory accounts, sometimes admitting to multiple killings, other times claiming memory lapses and mental distress. She stated she could not remember the exact number of victims. She was convicted of poisoning 11 former husbands and given 10 death sentences, in addition to a 10-year sentence for attempted murder. Number 25. Catherine May Wood. Catherine May Wood was born in Ohio and grew up in a stable but unremarkable household. She worked as a nurse's aide, a position that allowed her close contact with vulnerable patients. By her mid-20s, she was employed at the Alpine Manor nursing home in Walker, Michigan. There, she met another nurse's aide, Gwendolyn Graham. The two women became close and soon developed an intimate relationship that would evolve into one of the most chilling cases of serial murder in the state's history. Between January and February of 1987, several elderly female patients at Alpine Manor began dying under what appeared to be natural circumstances. The deaths initially raised no suspicion, as all the victims were elderly and suffered from serious health conditions. However, it would later be revealed that Wood and Graham had conspired to murder these patients as part of a private, twisted bond. According to court records, they chose victims who were frail and unlikely to draw immediate medical scrutiny. Gwendolyn Graham was alleged to have physically smothered the victims with washcloths or soft bedding, while Catherine Wood stood watch outside the room or helped with the cleanup. Wood later testified that the murders were carried out as a form of emotional game between them, an act meant to demonstrate loyalty and dominance within their relationship. In total, 5 patients were murdered, all between the ages of 60 and 97. The crimes came to light in 1988, when Wood, after her relationship with Graham ended, confided in her ex-husband about the murders. He reported her statements to the police, prompting an investigation that led to both women's arrests. During interrogation, Wood provided detailed accounts of the murders, which she said were primarily executed by Graham. In 1989, both women were tried in Michigan courts. Wood accepted a plea agreement in exchange for her testimony against Graham. Graham was convicted of 5 counts of murder and 1 count of conspiracy, receiving multiple life sentences without parole. Wood was sentenced to 20 to 40 years in prison. Number 26. Catherine Margaret Burney. Catherine Margaret Burney was born in Western Australia and grew up in a troubled household marked by instability and emotional neglect. During her teenage years, she became involved in petty crime and later formed a relationship with David Burney, a man who would become both her partner and accomplice in one of Australia's most disturbing series of crimes. The pair met again in their 30s, and soon began living together in a house in Willagee, a suburb of Perth, where they developed a shared interest in violent sexual fantasies. Between October 6 and November 5 of 1986, Catherine and David Burney committed a series of abductions and murders that came to be known as the Moorhouse Murders. Their victims were 4 young women, Mary Nielsen, Susanna Candy, Nolene Patterson, and Denise Brown, all abducted from Perth and taken to the Burneys' home at 10 Moorhouse Street, Willagee. Once there, the victims were restrained, assaulted, and murdered, with their bodies later buried in bushland near Gleneagles and Wanneroo. The murders were characterized by their methodical planning, with Catherine often luring the victims by pretending to need assistance or offering them a ride. The pair's crimes were uncovered after a 5th intended victim, 17-year-old Kate Moore, managed to escape from the house on November 10, 1986. Moore fled barefoot and half-dressed to a nearby residence, where she called the police. Acting on her account, officers arrested Catherine and David Burney at their home later that day. During interrogation, both confessed to the murders, leading investigators to the burial sites of the victims. Catherine Burney was charged with 4 counts of murder and 1 count of abduction. Her trial took place in 1987 at the Supreme Court of Western Australia. Both she and David pleaded guilty. Catherine was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Number 27. Amelia Dyer. Amelia Elizabeth Dyer was arrested in April 1896 in Caversham, Reading, England, after decades of operating as a baby farmer who murdered children entrusted to her care. Born in Bristol, she trained as a nurse and midwife, later offering to adopt unwanted babies for a fee during the late 19th century, when illegitimacy carried social stigma. Dyer initially placed children in other homes, but gradually began to murder them, to increase her profit and avoid the cost of care. Over the years, she attacked numerous children using white tape or dressmaking ribbon, often disposing of their bodies in rivers. Her crimes came to light when the body of a baby girl, later identified as Helena Fry, was found floating in the River Thames, wrapped in paper bearing Dyer's address. Police traced her to her home in Caversham, where they found baby clothes, vaccination papers, and other incriminating evidence. Dyer was arrested and confessed to several murders, though authorities believed she may have murdered as many as 400 infants over 3 decades. Her trial took place at the Old Bailey in May 1896, lasting only a few days. Dyer pleaded insanity, citing a history of mental breakdowns, but medical experts rejected her claim. She was convicted of 1 count of murder and sentenced to death. On June 10, 1896, she was executed by hanging at Newgate Prison in London. Number 28. Amy Archer Gilligan. Amy Archer Gilligan was born and raised in Connecticut, United States, where she lived a relatively quiet life before establishing a private nursing home known as the Archer Home for the Elderly and Infirm. Located in Windsor, Connecticut, the facility opened in the early years of the 20th century and initially gained a positive reputation for providing care to aging residents. However, beneath this appearance of compassion, Amy began a calculated series of murders that would later expose her as one of America's most notorious female serial killers. Between 1907 and 1916, a growing number of deaths occurred within her nursing home. Most victims were elderly men and women who had recently signed over their estates or savings to Amy in exchange for lifetime care. The deaths appeared natural, as many residents were old or sick. However, suspicions arose after the sudden death of Franklin R. Andrews, a healthy resident who died unexpectedly after expressing concern about a financial transaction involving Amy. Andrews's sister Nellie Pierce discovered inconsistencies in the records and alerted authorities. An investigation followed, revealing that Amy had purchased large quantities of arsenic and other poisons under the pretext of extermination. Exhumations of several bodies confirmed lethal amounts of arsenic and strychnine in the victims' systems. In total, authorities suspected Amy of murdering at least 5 residents directly, though over 40 deaths were reported during her management of the home. She was arrested in June 1916 and charged with multiple counts of murder. Amy maintained that she used poison only to control rats, denying any intention to harm her residents. The jury found her guilty of first-degree murder in the death of Franklin Andrews, and she was sentenced to death by hanging. Following an appeal in 1918, her sentence was reduced to life imprisonment due to questions about her mental stability. She died in the hospital in 1962 after more than 40 years in state custody. In total, she is believed to have murdered at least 5 confirmed victims, though suspicions extend to dozens more. Number 29. Jane Toppin. Jane Toppin was born Honora Kelly in Boston, Massachusetts, and later adopted by the Toppin family, where she took their surname. Growing up in hardship after her mother's death and her father's institutionalization for insanity, she entered nursing in her early 30s at the Cambridge Hospital. Colleagues knew her as cheerful and capable, but her conduct with patients gradually raised suspicion. Toppin began experimenting with morphine, testing how various doses affected the human body. Her fascination turned to murder. Her first recorded victims were elderly and vulnerable patients at the hospital, such as Israel Dunham and his wife, whom she attacked under the guise of treatment. After being dismissed from Cambridge Hospital due to unusual patient deaths, she continued her work privately as a nurse. She moved frequently between homes, administering the doses to her employers and their relatives. Among her most known victims were her foster sister Elizabeth Toppin, who died after Jane secretly gave her the dose in a fit of jealousy, and members of the Davis family in Calumet, Massachusetts. The deaths eventually drew attention when Edna Bannister, a surviving relative, became suspicious of Toppin's presence. After the sudden death of Genevieve Gordon, authorities ordered an autopsy that revealed lethal traces of morphine. Jane Toppin was arrested. During questioning, she confessed to at least 31 murders, claiming she derived excitement from holding her victims as they died. Number 30. Lavinia Fisher. Lavinia Fisher was arrested in February 1819 in Charleston, South Carolina, for a series of murders committed alongside her husband, John Fisher. She lived during a time when the area surrounding Charleston was plagued by reports of missing travelers. Lavinia and John operated a lodging house called the 6 Mile Wayfarer House, located 6 miles north of Charleston, where they are believed to have targeted guests who appeared wealthy. According to accounts, the Fishers would welcome travelers into their inn, offer them meals and lodging, and then rob and murder them during the night. One commonly repeated story described Lavinia serving poisoned tea to guests, causing them to fall unconscious before her husband would finish them off. Another account claimed the bed was rigged to collapse, sending victims into a pit below where they were murdered. The crimes came to light after a traveler named John Peoples managed to escape the inn and report his experience to local authorities. A subsequent search uncovered stolen goods belonging to several missing persons. Lavinia and John Fisher were arrested and charged with highway robbery, a capital offense at the time. Though murder was suspected, no bodies were officially recovered to confirm the killings. Both were convicted and sentenced to death. On February 18, 1820, Lavinia Fisher was executed by hanging at the Old City Jail in Charleston. Number 31. Sophie Johannesdottir. On a cold evening in January of the year 1868, in the rural community of Lyngdal, Norway, Sophie Johannesdotter was arrested after a string of mysterious deaths that had taken place in the household where she worked. Her crimes shocked the region and later the entire country, as the investigation revealed that multiple people had died under suspicious circumstances linked to her actions. Sophie Johannesdotter was born into poverty in the early 1840s in Hälsingland, Sweden. She grew up in a poor family and worked from an early age as a domestic servant. In her early 20s, she moved to Norway, where she was employed as a maid for the Nils Nilsson family in Lyngdal. Described by those who knew her as quiet and devout, Sophie often attended church and showed little emotion. However, behind her reserved nature, she harbored jealousy and resentment towards her employers and other servants. Her first known crime occurred when one of her employers, Nils Nilsson, fell ill after a meal. He died shortly after, and the cause of death was initially believed to be natural. Over the following years, several others in the household, including Nilsson's wife, Ingeborg, and one of their daughters, succumbed to sudden illness with similar symptoms, vomiting and paralysis. Each death was considered tragic but coincidental, until patterns began to emerge. By 1868, suspicion arose after Sophie attempted to poison a surviving daughter and was caught trying to administer a suspicious substance. Authorities later discovered that Sophie had used arsenic, a poison accessible at the time in rural communities. She confessed to poisoning 7 people, though investigators could only prove 5 deaths. Her motive appeared to be jealousy and resentment rather than financial gain. During her trial at the Kristiansand court, Sophie remained calm and emotionless. She reportedly admitted her crimes and expressed that she felt driven by what she described as an inner voice compelling her to kill. There was no formal appeal, and she did not attempt to deny her involvement. On February 18, 1876, she was sentenced to death by beheading, making her one of the last women to be executed in Norway. Number 32. Martha Needle. Martha Needle was born in South Australia and experienced a difficult upbringing marked by instability and hardship. By her early 20s, she had married Henry Needle and settled in Melbourne, where the couple had 3 young daughters. Outwardly, she appeared to live a quiet domestic life, but beneath that appearance lay a pattern of calculated poisoning that would later make her one of Australia's most notorious female killers of the 19th century. Her crimes began within her own household. Between the late 1880s and early 1890s, her husband Henry and their 3 children, Elsie, May, and Mabel, died one after another under mysterious circumstances. Each illness followed a similar course: vomiting, convulsions, and sudden death. The attending physicians concluded the deaths were caused by natural disease. After their passing, Martha collected insurance payments and received public sympathy as a grieving widow. By 1894, she was employed as a domestic servant in Melbourne, where she met and became engaged to a man named Otto Juncken. Otto's brother, Louis Juncken, grew suspicious of Martha's influence over his sibling. When Louis visited them, he suddenly fell ill and died. A post-mortem examination revealed arsenic poisoning, leading authorities to exhume the bodies of Martha's previous family members. Traces of arsenic were discovered in each case, confirming a deliberate pattern of poisoning. Martha Needle was arrested and charged with the murder of Louis Juncken, while the earlier deaths of her husband and children were presented as supporting evidence. During her trial at the Melbourne Supreme Court in 1894, she maintained her composure, denying guilt and insisting she had never harmed anyone. The prosecution argued she was motivated by financial gain and emotional detachment, showing no visible grief during or after the deaths. The jury found her guilty after deliberating on the consistent chemical evidence and testimonies linking her to the purchase of arsenic-laced substances. She was sentenced to death by hanging. In total, she murdered 5 people, her husband, 3 daughters, and her fiancé's brother, using arsenic poison as her weapon of choice. Number 33. Enriqueta Martí. Enriqueta Martí Repolas was born in Sant Feliu de Llobregat, near Barcelona, Spain. She came from a poor family and moved to Barcelona in her youth, where she initially worked as a housemaid and later as a nanny. In her early 20s, she turned to street work and became involved in the city's criminal underworld. Over the years, Martí developed a double life, posing as a healer who prepared herbal remedies and ointments for the wealthy, while secretly engaging in the abduction and murder of children. Her actions took place mainly in the El Raval district of Barcelona during the early 20th century. Her crimes came to light in February 1911, when a young girl named Teresita Guitart Congost disappeared from her neighborhood. After weeks of searching, a neighbor, Claudia Elias, reported seeing a child who matched Teresita's description through a window in Martí's flat at number 45 Calle de Ponant. Police entered the home and discovered Teresita alive, but visibly malnourished and frightened. Inside the residence, authorities found human remains, jars containing preserved body parts, and bloodied clothing. Further investigation revealed bones, hair, and containers filled with human fat and powdered remains, believed to have been used by Martí to make supposed medicinal potions and beauty creams. Following her arrest, Martí initially denied all charges, but later gave inconsistent statements, admitting to using children's blood and fat for her treatments. She was accused of kidnapping, child murder, and trafficking of minors. Public outrage in Barcelona grew rapidly, as newspapers portrayed her as the vampire of Barcelona. While the exact number of her victims remains uncertain, police connected her to the disappearances of several children over multiple years. Martí was held at Reina Amalia prison while awaiting trial. However, she never stood before a court. In May 1912, she was found dead in her cell after being beaten by fellow inmates who had grown hostile due to the nature of her crimes. She had been in custody for approximately 15 months. No final statement was recorded from her, and the full extent of her activities was never judicially established. As of August 2025, Enriqueta Martí remains one of Spain's most infamous historical figures in criminal history. She was never officially sentenced, having died in pre-trial detention. Enriqueta Martí carried out her murders using household blades, kitchen knives, and poisoning substances to extract remains for her mixtures. In total, she is believed to have murdered several children. Reports estimate between 6 and 10 victims. Number 34. Dagmar Overby. Dagmar Johanne Amalie Overby was a Danish woman from Copenhagen who became known as one of Denmark's most notorious female serial killers. Born into a modest family in the late 19th century, her early life was marked by instability and neglect. As an adult, she worked as a caretaker for infants, offering to foster or adopt children born out of wedlock. During the early 20th century, unwed mothers often faced severe social stigma, and Overby's services appeared compassionate and respectable. However, behind the facade of maternal care lay a sequence of calculated killings that would horrify the public. Between 1913 and 1920, Dagmar Overby murdered numerous children left in her care. Investigators later confirmed that she murdered between 9 and 25 babies, though the exact number remains uncertain. She operated from her home at Njave in Copenhagen, where mothers would bring their children for adoption. Instead of arranging care, Overby choked or drowned the victims shortly after receiving them. Some of the bodies were kept in her kitchen stove, while others were hidden around her property. Her crimes went undetected for several years until 1920, when a mother named Karen Marie Christensen, who had entrusted her newborn to Overby, grew suspicious after being denied updates about her child's welfare. Christensen reported her concerns to the police, prompting an investigation. When authorities searched Overby's home, they found bones and evidence of burned remains. She was arrested shortly after and charged with multiple counts of murder. Overby's trial began in 1921 at the Copenhagen City Court and became one of Denmark's most closely followed cases. Prosecutors detailed the deaths of 16 children, presenting physical evidence and testimonies from mothers who had dealt with her. Her defense argued that she suffered from mental illness, claiming she had endured severe trauma and delusions that drove her to believe she was saving the children from future misery. Psychiatrists examined her but found her legally sane and responsible for her actions. In March 1921, she was convicted of 9 murders and sentenced to death. Her sentence was later commuted to life imprisonment by King Christian, following appeals from her defense, citing her fragile mental state and Denmark's reluctance to execute women. She was transferred to the Nyborg State Prison, where she remained until her death. Number 35. Frances Knorr. Frances Lydia Alice Knorr, known in court records as Frances Knorr, was an English-born woman convicted of murder in Melbourne, Victoria, Australia. Her crimes were uncovered in December 1893, when the decomposing body of an individual was discovered buried under the floorboards of a rented house in Brunswick, a suburb of Melbourne. Frances had emigrated from London to Australia in the late 1880s with her husband, Rudolf Knorr. The couple struggled financially, and while Rudolf was later imprisoned for theft, Frances resorted to what was known as baby farming, a practice where infants were taken in for payment under the promise of care. When payments stopped or the parents could not return, many such children were neglected or murdered. In December 1893, after Frances vacated a house in Moreland Road, Brunswick, a new tenant found the buried remains of a baby. Police traced the rental records to Frances Knorr, who by then had moved to Sydney. She was arrested on December 10, 1893, after a search led to her identification through rental receipts. During interrogation, she denied claiming the deaths occurred from natural causes and that she buried them in panic. At her trial in January 1894 at the Supreme Court of Victoria, the prosecution, led by, argued that she had deliberately murdered the children to avoid the financial burden. The jury found her guilty of murder, and she was sentenced to death by hanging. Public appeals for clemency arose due to her gender and the emotional testimony she gave, especially her concern for her own infant daughter, but the petitions were rejected. She was executed at Melbourne Gaol on January 15, 1894, at the age of 24. Number 36. Louisa Peete. On April 21, 1944, in Pacific Palisades, California, the body of Margaret Logan was discovered buried in her backyard. Her companion, Louisa May Merrifield Peete, became the focus of the investigation. The case marked the second time Peete had been connected to a suspicious death. Louisa Peete was born in the southern United States and lived a transient life marked by charm, deceit, and theft. In her early 30s, she had already been linked to the mysterious death of a wealthy oil man, Jacob Denton, in Los Angeles. Denton's decomposing body was found in 1920, buried in a basement, and Peete was convicted of his murder. She served 18 years at the California Institution for Women in Tehachapi and was paroled in 1939. After her release, she worked as a housekeeper for Margaret and Arthur Logan, a couple who had campaigned for her parole. In 1943, Arthur Logan was sent to a sanitarium, and shortly after, Margaret disappeared. When Arthur's friends visited, Peete claimed Margaret had gone to care for a sick relative. Suspicion grew after she sold the Logans' possessions and forged checks. Margaret's body was found a year later, leading to Pete's arrest. During her trial in Los Angeles County, she remained calm and expressionless, denying involvement. The prosecution argued she choked Margaret Logan for financial gain. The jury convicted her of first-degree murder, and she was sentenced to death. Pete reportedly accepted her fate without visible emotion, offering no final statement. On April 11, 1947, Louisa Pete was executed in the gas chamber at San Quentin State Prison, becoming one of the few women executed in California. Number 37. Mary Ann Cotton. On March 24, 1873, at Durham Gaol in England, Mary Ann Cotton was executed for the murder of her stepson, Charles Edward Cotton. Her crimes had shocked Victorian Britain for their calculated nature and the number of lives lost. Mary Ann Cotton was born in a mining village in County Durham and grew up in poverty. As an adult, she worked as a seamstress and nurse. Over 2 decades, she married multiple men, each dying suddenly from what was believed to be gastric fever. It was later discovered that she had poisoned her victims using arsenic. Her motive was largely financial, as she collected life insurance policies on her husbands, lovers, and children. Authorities began to suspect her after the death of her stepson, Charles Edward, when a local doctor, alarmed by the number of deaths in her care, alerted police. An autopsy confirmed arsenic poisoning, leading to her arrest in 1872. During her trial at Durham Assizes, she denied all charges and remained composed throughout the proceedings. The jury found her guilty after deliberating for 90 minutes. She was sentenced to death by hanging. On the morning of her execution, Mary Ann showed little emotion and proclaimed her innocence before the trap was released. Mary Ann Cotton was convicted of murdering 1 person, but was strongly suspected of killing as many as 21 individuals, including her children and 3 husbands. She carried out her crimes using arsenic poison. As of August 2025, Mary Ann Cotton remains deceased, having been executed after serving less than 1 year in Durham Gaol. Number 38. Sara Maria Aldrete Villarreal. Sara Maria Aldrete Villarreal was born in Matamoros, Tamaulipas, Mexico, and later moved between the United States and Mexico. By her early 20s, she was a college student studying physical education at Texas Southmost College in Brownsville, Texas. During this time, she became involved with Adolfo de Jesus Constanzo, a Cuban-American cult leader who claimed to practice a form of Palo Mayombe, a religion that he twisted into human sacrificial rituals. Together, they would later be known as the leaders of the Matamoros death cult. Between the mid-1980s and 1989, Aldrete Villarreal, Constanzo, and several followers engaged in a series of ritualistic murders near Matamoros. The victims were often rival traffickers, cult members who betrayed the group, or individuals kidnapped for sacrifice. The group believed that human sacrifices offered them supernatural protection from law enforcement and helped ensure success in their drug smuggling operations. One of their most widely reported murders was that of Mark Kilroy, a 21-year-old American college student from Texas who disappeared during spring break in March 1989. His remains were found on a ranch called Santa Elena, along with those of more than a dozen other victims. Authorities discovered the cult's activities after Kilroy's disappearance prompted an intensive joint investigation by U.S. and Mexican authorities. On April 11, 1989, police raided the Santa Elena Ranch, uncovering cauldrons filled with human remains, animal parts, and ritual objects. Aldrete Villarreal and other members fled, while Constanzo died in a police shootout after ordering one of his followers to kill him to avoid capture. Aldrete Villarreal was arrested shortly after and charged with multiple counts of murder, criminal association, and involvement in organized crime. During her trial in 1990, Aldrete Villarreal claimed she had been manipulated by Constanzo and had no direct participation in the murders. However, witnesses and cult members testified that she held a high position in the group, often referred to as La Madrina, the godmother, and actively participated in the rituals. She was sentenced to 62 years in prison. Later, she received an additional sentence for her role in other murders linked to the cult, bringing her total prison term to over 100 years. As of August 2025, Sara Maria Aldrete remains incarcerated in a Mexican federal prison, having served more than 35 years of her sentence. Number 39. Daisy de Melker. Daisy de Melker was a South African nurse from Johannesburg, arrested in April 1932 for a series of poisonings that claimed the lives of her two husbands and her son. Born in Grahamstown, she trained as a nurse and later married William Cowell, a plumber, with whom she had several children. Their life appeared ordinary until Cowell's sudden death in 1923, officially attributed to cerebral malaria. Within a few years, Daisy married again, this time to another plumber, Robert Sproat. In 1927, Sproat died unexpectedly after suffering severe stomach pains. Both men's deaths were followed by Daisy collecting substantial life insurance payments. In 1932, her eldest son, Rhodes Cowell, also died under suspicious circumstances after drinking cocoa prepared by his mother. Relatives, including her stepdaughter, expressed concerns, prompting an exhumation. Tests conducted by a pathologist found traces of arsenic in the remains of both husbands and the son. Daisy was arrested and charged with 3 counts of murder. Her trial took place at the Supreme Court in Johannesburg in October 1932. The prosecution, led by advocate Oswald Pirro, presented evidence of her financial motives and her pattern of substance acquisition. Daisy maintained her innocence, claiming that the deaths were natural and denying any involvement with poison. Witnesses testified about her purchasing substances from a local chemist. The jury deliberated for less than half an hour before finding her guilty of the murder of her son, Rhodes, but not guilty of the murders of her husbands. On December 31, 1932, she was sentenced to death by hanging. She was executed at Pretoria Central Prison on December 31, 1932, at the age of 46. Number 40. Mary Ann Britland. In the year 1886, in Ashton-under-Lyne, Lancashire, England, Mary Ann Britland brutally poisoned 3 people in a calculated series of murders that would later lead to her execution. Mary Ann Britland worked in a local mill and also as a landlady. She was married to Thomas Britland, and the couple had a daughter named Elizabeth. Facing financial difficulties and an affair with her neighbor's husband, she sought a deadly solution. In March of that year, she purchased Rough-on Rats, a substance containing arsenic, from a local chemist, claiming it was to chase mice. Her first victim was her own daughter, 16-year-old Elizabeth, who suddenly fell ill and died shortly after consuming a pudding prepared by her mother. 2 months later, in May, she murdered her husband, Thomas Britland, using the same method. With both gone, she moved closer to her neighbor, Mary Dixon, with whom she had been close friends. Within weeks, Dixon also died the same way. Authorities became suspicious after the rapid sequence of deaths within the same social circle. Post-mortem examinations confirmed the presence of arsenic in all 3 bodies. Mary Ann Britland was arrested and stood trial at the Manchester Assizes in July 1886. During the proceedings, she appeared calm and denied any wrongdoing, though evidence from chemists and neighbors confirmed her purchase of the substance. The jury found her guilty of all 3 murders, and she was sentenced to death. On August 9, 1886, she was executed by hanging at Strangeways Prison in Manchester. Number 41. Belle Gunness. In LaPorte, Indiana, between the late 1800s and early 1900s, Belle Gunness was suspected of orchestrating one of the most extensive series of murders in American history. Belle Gunness, originally from Norway, emigrated to the United States seeking prosperity. Standing nearly 6 feet tall and of a strong build, she was known for her imposing presence and ambition. After the deaths of her 2 husbands, both under suspicious circumstances involving insurance claims, she began placing advertisements seeking wealthy male suitors. Many men responded, arriving at her LaPorte farmhouse with money and valuables. Few were ever seen again. Belle's method involved luring her victims under the promise of marriage, then drugging or bludgeoning them before dismembering the bodies and burying them around her property. In April 1908, a fire destroyed her farmhouse. Among the remains, investigators discovered several bodies, including that of a woman initially believed to be Belle Gunness, and multiple buried remains in her hog pen. Her farmhand, Ray Lamphere, was charged with arson and found guilty of setting the fire, but denied murdering anyone. The identity of the female body found was disputed, and many believed Belle faked her death to escape capture. Reports later placed her in various parts of the United States, though none were confirmed. Belle Gunness is believed to have murdered between 14 and 40 victims in total. As of August 2025, her final fate remains officially unknown, and no verified burial or imprisonment record exists. Number 42. Piroska Jancsó-Ladányi. Piroska Jancsó-Ladányi was born and raised in Hungary, in the small town of Szeged, where she grew up in an environment of hardship and instability. As a young woman, she was described as intelligent but manipulative, showing little empathy from an early age. She later moved to Budapest, where she worked various jobs before finding employment connected to social services. By her mid-20s, she had become involved in a series of child abductions and murders that would shock the nation. Between 1953 and 1954, several young girls between the ages of 4 and 11 disappeared from Budapest's 13th district. Parents reported the cases to police, but investigations initially yielded no clear leads. The crimes followed a similar pattern. The victims were lured away from their homes or playgrounds by a young woman who offered them sweets or small gifts. Each child was later found strangled or smothered, often buried in shallow graves in or near the city's outskirts. Suspicion fell on Piroska after witnesses described a woman matching her appearance seen with one of the victims, a girl named Eva Schmidt. When investigators questioned her, she initially denied any involvement, but eventually confessed after hours of interrogation. She admitted to killing several young girls, explaining that she felt compelled by jealousy and frustration toward children who received the affection she claimed she had been denied throughout her own childhood. She was arrested in 1954 and charged with multiple counts of murder. During her trial in Budapest, forensic evidence and her confessions connected her to at least 4 confirmed murders, though authorities believed she may have killed more. Psychological evaluations described her as mentally disturbed but aware of her actions. The court found her guilty on all counts, and she was sentenced to death by hanging. She was executed in 1954 at a Budapest prison facility. Number 43. Madeleine Mouton. Madeleine Mouton was a French-born woman who became known as one of the few female serial killers in South Africa. Her crimes took place in the town of Griequetown, located in the Northern Cape region, during the early 1940s. Mouton was born in France and moved to South Africa after marrying her husband, a local man named Jean Mouton. Together, they settled in a small rural community where Madeleine's reputation grew for being respectable and religiously devoted. Beneath that image, however, she harbored severe emotional instability and resentment toward those around her. In the years leading up to the crimes, Madeleine developed an addiction to alcohol and morphine, often displaying erratic behavior. As her mental state deteriorated, she began to target individuals close to her, including family members, neighbors, and acquaintances, using poison as her weapon of choice. Between the years of 1941 and 1942, several people in her vicinity, began falling mysteriously ill after consuming food or drink she had prepared. Her victims included her husband, a close friend, and other community members. Each case presented similar symptoms: vomiting, convulsions, and sudden death, prompting suspicions within the community. Authorities eventually began to take notice when local doctors observed a pattern in the deaths. The turning point came when forensic examinations confirmed the presence of arsenic in the bodies of multiple victims. Madeleine Mouton was subsequently arrested in 1942 and charged with several counts of murder. The court found her guilty of murdering 4 people in total. She was sentenced to death by hanging. On the day of her execution in 1942, witnesses described her as calm, reciting prayers quietly as she was led to the gallows. Thank you for watching till the end.